I want to say that again because people love taking stuff out of context. They'll watch the first 20 minutes of this and think that we're saying that it's totally fine. You can write anything you want and there should be no criticism. That's horseshit. Every freaking media you can think of has been made as gay as humanly possible. And this is wonderful. If you're going to tell me that Berserk did harm, you need to show me how.
Do you want to like make ADHD kids like never do anything again? Only give them negative critique and that's it.
Ugh, hair and mouth. Hello, everyone. So, yeah, I don't really know how to start this one off, but it's something that's been on our minds because we've been seeing this weird phenomenon. So let me describe the phenomenon. Zena, please jump in as you need to. Let me describe the phenomenon, and then you guys can kind of tell me your thoughts. There's this thing that happens on Discord where, like, when people come into the server new, they want to ask us questions. Like, they want to know what our take is on various different topics. And often, you know, we can't respond to all of those because...
there's a lot going on.
Yeah, well, there's a lot going on. We're dealing with stuff, yada, yada. But... and here's the thing that I want to make really, really clear. One of the things that we've noticed as a trend, and this has now happened, I want to say half a dozen times, is someone will come into the Discord and want to talk about fan fiction. And Zena and I got thinking about this because we noticed a couple things. One was that some of these people were coming in here fairly little t traumatized. I don't mean traumas in like PTSD, but I mean the term little t trauma like we use in EMDR, something that seems to demonstrably affect them negatively and seems to get kind of stuck in the whole working memory thing. That is, it gets stuck in their mind and different things can bring those triggers up, yada, yada, yada. So the idea is that what I seem to notice is, and this is what Zena brought to my attention, is these folks will come in there, and this first part is that they kind of act as though people have basically beaten into them emotionally that they have to abide by very, very strict rules of writing. Otherwise, they are a bad person. So this gets into the essentialization thing, right? Where because you have made this content, you are immediately bad.
You are bad to your core. Bad, 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 yeah.
Yeah, it's children's logic. And some of these people have been actively, like, kind of harmed by this kind of rhetoric, right? Not going to say that this is the only place where this probably happens, as anyone who's seen a Sarah Zed video probably knows that there are plenty of people who say weird stuff about, you know, fanfic and shipping and all this other stuff. But this usually just does specifically fan fiction, not visual art. Usually different beast. Though I think some of the arguments here might transfer depending on your proclivity. Though that discussion might have to wait for another time because I want to get data on specifics of certain parts of that. This is specifically referring to fan fiction and only fan fiction. The other part of this was that Zena and I realized in discussing this that this was a really good example of our issue with harm versus offense.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. For those who don't know, we have started a series, this will be the first part of it, where we will discuss an example of how people's offense can sometimes be conflated as harm. Now, we'll go into more general basics in another video at some point, but I wanted to bring this up as kind of a starting point, just to kind of use as a way to play with. So, before I continue, Zena, did you want to add anything, or?
No, that's about where we're at. Yeah.
Okay, want to make sure. So, so here's the thing. Within the online left is a large spectrum of views, and in that spectrum of views, there is a lot of different takes about how one deals with media. right? And there seems to be a contingent of the online left, at least from what I've seen, who are very puritanical about media. Fan fiction's a good example of this. If you write about certain types of topics, you are just a bad person. Right? There are certain types of things that, no matter how they are written, are always considered bad. And this really kind of weirds me out, because the arguments seem to be twofold. One is that it seems to be based on this notion that these things are so bad they must be never discussed. And the presence of these things, regardless of context or how well they are discussed, does harm. Now, on the first part, I don't like thought policing. Zena and I are pretty clear that thought policing and attempting to change the way people think or feel about a thing, you can do that with arguments.
Mm-hmm.
But this idea that you want to go through and somehow tell people what they can and cannot think or do, you can do one of those. You can do the doing part. People should engage in certain behaviors. There are things that can be written about, arguably, that should not be done. Because one of those things, the doing, is actively harmful. The writing about, and this is the second part, is if you're going to argue to me that it does harm, you need to demonstrate how.
Yep.
Right? Is that's kind of where we're coming from? Yeah. So, like, let's think about this from a certain perspective. So, if you're going to make the claim that writing about a particular type of topicality is in and of itself harm, you have to be able to make an argument to demonstrate that. So you would have to argue that somehow just mentioning this thing will either cause people to do it, that it in somehow makes the world a worse place to be. And if you combine that with the idea that ever talking about these things is bad, that is, there is no good way to talk about them, then they are always harmful.
Well, and the next part to this too is that even if there is harm from something, okay, how great is that harm actually, right? Is this kind of like, hey, this is part of some larger cultural phenomenon? You know, maybe somebody hasn't thought through, a topicality that they're writing about very well. Maybe they kind of misunderstood some things, right? Or is this like, hey, you know what? Maybe they didn't write it the same way that I would have,
mm-hmm.
Right? There are various levels of harm to this. So,
if it even gets into the realm.
If it even gets into that, yeah.
So I'll give you guys a hypothetical. Bear with me on this one, because Zena is absolutely correct. There are, first off, spectrums of harm. And there's also the question of, does it even meet the threshold of harm?
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give an example. Let's say we have a person, and for the purposes of this discussion, we will make them adult. And this person writes a story, a fanfic, and we don't have to say what media it's connected to. We can just say that it is connected to some sort of pre-existing media. Or even then, they've done like a self-insert fan fiction kind of thing. And the idea is that this person who has, let's say in their background, again, trigger warning for abuse, has gone through sexual abuse as a child. In the story they write about a scenario that happens that is analogous to the experiences they had. And in this narrative, they write it in a way that actively does a good job of showing that this is wrong and bad. right? It frames this as horrible. Once this writer puts this out, the question becomes, one, is this topic something that always should not be talked about? Well, it seems like they're doing their due diligence to talk about this in a healthy and responsible manner, so I can't really agree with point one. Two is if it does harm. And this is where the thing gets dicey, because generally from what we've seen, the two types of harm people talk about in a circumstance like this hypothetical is either they say that it's going to be triggering for people. That is, anyone who has gone through a similar type of experience is going to be triggered, though why that person would be in there is questionable. Though I could see someone doing that as a way to process their own history. I know that many people who have been victims of various types of abuse do explore various things, sometimes kink, sometimes other things, as means by which to process and work with their trauma. So we can't even necessarily judge them for even deciding to engage with that. There's also the idea that the media could be consumed by the bad people. And the problem is that I don't know if that makes sense, because the issue is that once a piece of media is published, put out there, put online, whatever, you don't really get to control your audience. We put out videos, and these videos are found by you guys, but they're also found by a lot of really kind of horrific people who leave really awful comments, calling me all sorts of things and ignoring Zena's existence. Both really bad things to do. Though we seem to get more pissed off about the effects on the other one. So, a good loving relationship. So the question then becomes, if you can't control who is observing your media, and you can't control what they do with that media, is the media really the problem? Or is this an issue of sort of accepting that there are sometimes yucky and not great things in the world? Because I don't know how you actually stop that without getting into a level of, like I said, thought policing. Spherical Cat asked, how do you contend with the whole normalization of bad and problematic things argument? And my argument to that is, you need to show me objective proof that that is the case. Because when someone says that something's being normalized, they're making an argument. But just because you've made the argument doesn't mean that you've actually made a good argument. It doesn't mean you've provided any data. I can tell you that my at least passing glance on this data a long time ago was that access to certain medias seems to have the opposite effect of what you think it would. For example, places where certain types of media are more available seem to cut down on certain types of assaults. Now, there may be contraindicating data there. There could be something that I'm not aware of there. But I can only tell you
other cultural phenomenon happening, right?
Other cultural phenomenon, and also other things that may be being normalized in there, even if it's not creating the specific bad thing. Who knows? But this is the problem, is a lot of times the people who are making the normalization argument are often doing it from this place of sort of like post hoc justification. It feels like moralizing, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I don't take those arguments seriously until somebody can actually start demonstrating something. Then I'll actually tune in and be like, okay, now we'll actually engage with you. Because it, like Jess said, right? They're going usually from the moralizing argument. Did you have more on that?
Yeah.
And then I'll kind of swing back.
State your part again, because sorry, there was something that Theo posted that I...
Oh, I don't actually engage with people or take them seriously when they're trying to tell me that, like, something is normalizing some large-scale thing until they can actually start formulating the argument enough to actually, like, explain demonstrably how that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is that you can make those arguments. You can say, okay, I think this might create a problem because it's normalizing. But the problem is usually, again, the people that make that tend to do it from a position of assuming out the gate that that is what is happening without any curiosity or willingness to observe and understand if that's the case. So, for example, like to give just a kind of thing, there are media that has some really weird stuff in it. A good example of this is the Berserk manga. I'm not a fan of Berserk. I don't like Berserk. But I can say that the people who are fans of Berserk can say that there have been examples of things like assault in there, at least in the case of the main character. that seem to be justifiable in the context of the actual narrative. If you're going to tell me that Berserk did harm, you need to show me how. Did rapes increase? Was there some kind of like overly muscly men running around doing this? Like what was the actual outcome? If we talk about something like, for example, the harm of over-policing or the negative effects of Jim Crow and redlining and things like that on African Americans, there's just data for that. We can look that up. We can look at the negative effects of shitty piping on kids' rate of gaining ADHD. We can talk about the effects of the ways that over-policing in areas can lead to larger problems of over-incarceration and stuff like that.
Well, and notice something about these problems, too, is that these are very big, large-scale problems that individuals don't have individual control over, at least not most people, okay? If you're, like, the person in charge of checking something, like the pipes in a construction area, like, no, you do. But beyond that, by and large, like, I don't have control over that. And so when we're talking with stuff about writing and fanfic on the internet, and normalizing stuff, a lot of times those normalizing arguments have this way in which, like, individuals are having to take responsibility for, like, some larger societal thing, whether or not they're participating in that. Because normally, right, with an individual stuff, right, like, I can just make a boundary and be like, hey, you know what, I'm not comfortable with jokes about this thing, right? And so I let my friend know that, and they go, okay, neat, cool, I'll respect that, right? And then we go on with our lives. But when it comes to fanfic, it's never that simple. It's never just like, okay, this is a personal boundary. And that's usually what I think, a lot of these things with fanfic really probably should be is, hey, I don't want to engage with it. That makes me uncomfortable, right? Instead of confusing it with, well, I need the larger argument of it normalizing harm in society.
And this is where we get into the other part of this conversation, because I want to make something, hair and mouth, abundantly clear. We are not saying you can't have critiques. I want to say that again because people love taking stuff out of context. They'll watch the first 20 minutes of this and think that we're saying that it's totally fine, you can write anything you want, and there should be no criticism. That's horseshit.
We are just saying you can write whatever you want. You can do it, okay?
However, you can still have critique put against you. I will give you an example of my personal pet peeve. I don't read fanfic. But there are people who do fanfic, especially pictures of notable characters on Twitter, or will do actual fanfic stories. And I will tell you of my personal bitch. I really dislike when people take canonically queer characters and change their sexuality for the purposes of their story. My reasoning for this is twofold. One is that the story writer took that opportunity to make a queer character and represent that particular demographic. And to me, that should be honored as one queer person to another. A good example of this is in the Has-Been Hotel fandom. There's a preponderance of people that like to ship Alistair with people. Except Alistair is canonically asexual. And some of these are very compromising sexual positions. I find myself very bothered because it starts to feel like ace erasure. Now, am I saying that this is doing large-scale harm? Is this like normalizing ace erasure? No, and I can't fucking know that. My other reason for it is that it doesn't fall into the purview of the argument of there weren't any queer characters, so we needed to make some. One of the big reasons in fanfic, and this has been around like since the 70s, I think, maybe even earlier, is that people will do this thing where they will see a show or media they really enjoy, and regardless of whether there's queer baiting or not, they will go out of their way to make certain characters gay in fan fiction as a means by which to add representation to their favorite thing. Supernatural's an example of this. Doctor Who's been examples of this. Every frickin' media you can think of has been made as gay as humanly possible. And this is wonderful. But the reason for it is that heterosexual cis people and relationships are so normalized because of cis sexism and heteronormativity that we have to create them. Because up until the last 10 to 15 years, we didn't have Voltron and its poor but still meaningful attempt at a gay couple. Or She-Ra and the very clear, awesome gay couple in that. Though Catra has borderline, I stand Catra. Catra did nothing wrong. Or, for example, the very real representation in also She-Ra, where there has been stated behind the scenes that it's basically said that the one flower princess is trans. That stuff's based. That's cool. I like that. Owl House. You have a character that is coded loose as being non-binary. Like she, they. They just come off as a she, they. And you have Amity, who is a raging lesbian. And they're babus, and they're adorable. But we didn't always have that, so people had to fill it in the stories they wrote. How many... I mean, fuck, one of the largest ships in all of fandom came from Star Trek fan fiction, where Kirk was banging Spock. Actually, I don't know who the top was. I don't know, whatever. Probably have them both ways, to be honest. But this is the point that we're trying to make here, is that you can make critiques. I make tons of critiques. If you write something that I find objectionable, that's it. It's just objectionable. I'm offended. I'm offended when you take queer characters and change their sexuality, because that sucks. You finally get a character that is canonically and absolutely queer, and then we change it. That sucks. But that's my bitch. That's all it is. It's just a bitch I have. It's not like I'm making the argument that this is doing normalized harm. In fact, there's no way I can make that argument, because I think that would be dumb as fuck. You can make critiques against this type of stuff. You can make arguments and say, hey, I don't know if this was the best representation of this thing. But there has to be this willingness of benefit of the doubt with people when they're writing stuff, because we can't always know what their intentions are. If you read a piece of media and it's written in such a way that is off or weird, then you should mention that. You should bring that up. Not in a harassing way, not in a way that condemns the person morally as being this repugnant thing, but mention that you don't like the way this was handled. Right? Someone in chat mentioned earlier Goblin Slayer. Apparently in the manga, in the very first manga, and also the first episode of Goblin Slayer, again, trigger warning, sexual assault, there's a woman who gets assaulted by a bunch of goblins, because in that world, goblins are weird parasitic monsters that do that. That's how they breed. They find other races and do this. It's a disgusting concept, but I get why they did it. The whole purpose of the world is to look at these things as a sort of virally spreading parasitic monster that needs to be destroyed. And that everyone falls asleep on them because they don't have great XP and because, they're a very small level mob. However, in the manga, this is seen as depicted as horrific. It's kind of like the entry of, this is going to be rough. In the anime, and you watch Mother's Basement's video on this, it's depicted as fetishization. And it's gross. In fact, I think the Mother's Basement video we watched on it, this was like a year or so ago, went through and basically talked about how different things were set up in the scene to change the entire meaning of this. You can critique that. You can critique the shit out of that. But this idea that, because they changed this immediately means that it is somehow justifying predatory behavior, even though the goblins are still being framed as monsters, the fetishization contradicts this, but it doesn't get rid of it. And so you see where this gets problematic. You see where this gets odd, is that you can really break this down. But I feel like, and this is where Zena was alluding to earlier, maybe you can speak more to this in a second, there's a tendency for people to not like arguments that are their opinions. Facts don't care about your feelings. It's just an opinion. It's just this, whatever. But here's the problem. If you then have to try to change your argument into some sort of objective form of harm, the burden of proof falls to you to show how we've went from being offended to harm. Right? Because it feels like a power grab. And you spoke this a little bit earlier. I wonder if people are going to talk more about that.
Which part?
The part where people turn this into harm. What do you presuppose why that is?
Oh, it always just feels like they don't like have a good enough argument, right? Or they're like, I don't know what to do, or they're not able to make a personal boundary, right? It feels like skipping steps to me. Like there's such a keyed up nature to some of this that just skipping steps and going right to like the harassment stage, right? Because that's what it is. When you're just like offended by something and then claiming it's harm and then now like attacking a person's account or a person and everything like associated with them, no, that's just harassment at that point. That's where we go.
It's zealotry.
Yeah.
You've turned this into, rather than being offended, into a moral issue. And now you're using that moralization as a means to then start your own little personal, either one person or if you get more people involved, multiple people crusade against this. If anyone doesn't believe this stuff happens, look at the pro versus the anti-shipper video by Sarah Zed. Right? Like in that video, she actively points out how like pro shippers are usually teenagers that are exploring various aspects of sexuality and you know, and kink and various other stuff. And these kids are figuring this stuff out. So of course some of it's going to be garbage.
Oh, absolutely. And we say kids, but like that can be adults too, right? Like just because, you know, we don't just stop learning when we're a child, okay? Even as an adult, if you're like, hey, you know what, I really want to like explore this type of thing for whatever reason, okay? Fucking do it. It's fine to write about it. It's fine. Like you can write that stuff out and get that out and then kind of look at it later, right? But do I think anyone needs to be like harassed because of that? No. Like,
well, and again, it's like there's this weird way that we give professionals in writing or comics or whatever a weird pass on some of this stuff, but then we don't necessarily go as hard on, or we actually go harder on like people who are clearly amateurs. Like, let's be clear. The Killing Joke sucks. Spicy take. I dislike The Killing Joke. I think it has a couple good pieces in it, but let's be clear. The whole assault of Barbara Gordon thing was absolutely unnecessary. Hey, Bun.
hi, Poppers.
In fact, the movie they did of that, where they then added in the weird romantic thing with Bruce and Barbara, which was quasi-incestuous and quasi-uncomfortable as fuck, not even quasi, just was uncomfortable as fuck, is by its nature things to critique and are good examples of where this stuff can be mishandled. You can make the Joker terrifying without him engaging in assault. And if you're going to use that as a thing, if you're going to escalate the Joker's behavior to something like that, you need a damn good reason. Great example, Joker and Harley's relationship in later comics. I think those are far more defensible than The Killing Joke. But we give Alan Moore a pass because Alan Moore writes great shit. And a bunch of fan fiction writers, we talk, you know, they go through this like weird fucking like micro T trauma thing where they end up interacting with other writers. And some of these people came from, you know, Lily Orchard, just saying, getting beaten up emotionally because they wrote something that was offensive to other people. And those people, not having good arguments, as Zena just said, decide to escalate it to harm. By the way, Jason Nebular, thank you so much for the super chat at $7.99 Australian. I think it is just an easy way to win arguments when one is clearly losing. True and based.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it raises the stakes, right? Using the normalization and the big society thing raises the stakes, right? So it would, I think that's kind of the hope with it, yeah.
Well, but it feels like a manipulation. That's the
absolutely.
Problem, right? Because the person is now they take their morality and their offense and then escalate it to a society-wide level because just owning it as their shit is vulnerable because it's just their shit.
Right? You actually have to own the things that make you uncomfortable, that make you scared, right?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Like, for example, someone just brought up Voltron. Not a fanfic, but I will bring this up. Didn't watch the eighth season of Voltron. Just didn't get into it. I kind of lost it towards the seventh. But here's what I'll say. As far as the whole bury your gays trope, I don't care. It worked in the story. I didn't have a problem with it. Do you know what was actually offensive to me? all the weird shippers with Shiro and fucking Keith. A kid that he basically raised as a mentor since he was like 14. Me going, y'all are justifying some grooming shit here and like, and you're bitching about a dead husband? Like, I'm sorry, like, both things can be bad, or one of them is clearly just a bad storytelling trope. The other one is just, stop it. Like, and again, but they want to write that, that's fine, that's their call. It's not harmful, it's offensive.
Well, yeah, and we get into the, what are you writing the thing and having it out there versus actually advocating for doing something problematic, right? There's also another line in there. Do we want to take something a little fun?
She's just chilling.
Oh, she's whining at us.
Is she? All right.
She is staring at the camera, whining as the poor dog woke up and went, I need the love. What are you
keep talking. You keep talking. I'll deliver the bun.
Okay.
We'll bring her back at the end.
Yeah, she can come see people. So yeah, right. So getting into I think the next part that we were going to go into was, advocating for actually doing something for an action versus just writing a story. Okay. All right. And this whole thing is going to keep coming down to things that are done like in a fantasy space, like in writing, are not the same as something that is actually done in human space, in like meat space. I'm saying meat space because like we're all on the internet, okay? So I can't like call, me and like the real world, because like the internet space is still the real world. We're all still participating here, so like meat space. But yeah, so I was saying advocating for things is different than like just having a story about it, right? We talk about fascism in 100,000 different, YA stories. Okay, but are those stories actually advocating for it? No, they're not.
I mean, let's even talk about this in a weird sense. Like, Starship Troopers, the book, is actively advocating for fascism. The movie thinks fascism is for the lulz and completely makes it look stupid as shit. You don't like what they wrote, counter it. Like, that's what you do there. Like,
you counter it or you block it, right? You don't look at it. That's the big part. I think that's the big part too, right? Like, if you're really, like, if a lot of people are really like, we don't want to engage with this, then don't. Because you know what happens when you start banning books? More people want to read it. Happens every time.
Well, and I'll give you a thing, like, what people are saying in there, like, the whole, like, mentor-student thing. If you're doing a story and you can make that work, you have to, in that story, in my opinion, address the power dynamic. This is the same thing if you have characters of different ages. You have to address the power dynamic, and you have to make sure that the power dynamic doesn't go so far as the other person had no ability to consent at the beginning. So again, if this person started off as a minor and then they entered this relationship and became an adult, like that I'm going to critique you for, because I don't know if there's a way, in my opinion, that can be handled well. But I don't feel like reading a bunch of fanfic to find out and be proven wrong. That's just my personal take. Do you see the difference? Do you notice why I'm owning my language? I'm getting concerned for some of the kiddos that come into our server because they clearly have been harmed by this, in my opinion. They're not just offended, they're scared. They're asking me as an adult, at least nominally an adult, or Zena as an adult, whether we are okay with writing whatever. And it's like, no, you can write what you want. You have to expect people are going to critique you for it. And framing matters, and how things work matters. And this is true of anything. Yeah. But people want to dodge the nuanced arguments and go into just, it did harm.
Well, and this gets into you can take their critique or not. Not all critique is good, let's be real here. Like, some people are really bad at it. And yeah, I mean, I think that is a big thing. It's just, anything can be critiqued.
Well, and again, people escalate critique, that is constructive critique, to criticism and aggression so quickly. And we have to watch for this in our own communities. How do you not do that? I fall victim to this. I know you guys do. How do you stop that from happening? Because one of the things I think is really important about this to take into consideration is, give you an example of something that I think people have overestimated the harm on. It's not a fanfic. It's a show. It's called Kill la Kill. I love Kill la Kill. It's probably going to be a Things I Love video at some point. I think it's great. But in that show, there's a lot of skimpy clothing.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Do you know why I don't have a big problem with it? It's because the simple fact is the show goes out of its way to normalize bodies. That at some point the titillation stops mattering and it normalizes the idea that they're just bodies. That's it. In fact, the end of the anime, for those who have seen it, you know how everyone ends up when they catch Ryuko, right? You have a whole bunch of characters, all in a, essentially, all of them are, because the enemy in the show is clothes, again, watch the fucking show, don't just get weird. In a situation where they're all being loving and intimate, and I mean in a very like wholesome family way, they just also happen to be naked. Now you can critique that if you want, but it follows the thread of the show, and that is they're just bodies. The shame people have over their bodies and the titillation and all this other stuff doesn't matter. They're all just ways in which parasitic creatures as clothing have taken over. Yes, anime also clothes are fascism. Well, yes, because they're aliens that feed off
There's
people.
a lot in that show.
I have seen Shimonetta. It's brilliant. Zena has not seen Shimonetta. Again, love fluid. That's all I'm going to say. But do you guys get this? Does this make sense? Do you guys get this? That you guys can critique a thing, you can dislike a thing, without turning it into the next moral crusade? Like, what are you, fucking reactionaries? Are we conservatives? Right, conservatives are looking for everything under the damn sun to try to be whiny about, from Mr. Potato Head to whatever, because they have to have this stuff. Now, we're going to talk about later tonight some things around the ideas of culture war and some of that stuff, but this is how they keep weaponizing that stuff. They find a way to make their people get as offended as possible and then claim it as doing harm. Why do we do the same thing? I can be honest, and this is my personal take, I don't think it's a conservative or a lefty or a lib thing. I think it's a human thing. When we feel emotionally charged, we want to make what is happening affect everyone else. And so we escalate the harm that could be done. The other thing is creators grow. Satoshi Kon regretted having the scene in Perfect Blue, though who's seen it knows the scene, and wish he had included in the film later in his career. Exactly. Sometimes people do edgy crap in their stories or their shows or things like that.
Well, that's where I was thinking of going next, too, right? Yeah. Is that when people grow, too, they're not always going to do everything perfectly, and that's okay. Like, it's okay if it's not perfect the first time. Also, you're always going to be writing about things that you don't know about. That's the point, right? You are imagining yourself in new situations, other situations, something just a bit different from your life, or something really, really different from your life, right?
Minerva, I'll cover in a minute.
You know, and so when we're exploring these things, they're not always going to be 100% correct, and it's certainly, you know, when somebody does a really crappy job and it gets published and it gets big, it sucks. It's really not fun. Critique the shit out of it, okay? But when we're talking about, like, fanfic and stuff that are not, like, widespread especially, it's like, nah, just let it go. It's fine. Like, it's fine. Like, if you don't want to interact with it, it's fine. You know, and I'm going to say this. I don't care if somebody is a cisgender, heterosexual person and wants to write a trans character. It's fine. They can do it. It's fine. Let them do it. God damn it. Okay? It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. I promise. You know, like, will they get 100% of it right? Maybe not. But you know what? Did that person go through and think through all of this stuff to try and write that character? Yes, they did. You know, and so again, critique, but we don't need to harass them for it.
So there's a lot of things in chat I got to answer.
Oh God, I can't even read half the chats right now.
So here's the thing. One of them is that, Veronica brought up moral luck. So morally lucky is an idea where essentially people are results of their environment. And so because of the ways they were brought up, their family, their systems around them, they are more likely to fall into more correct positions. This is just demonstrably true. I don't know why anyone argues this. I disagree with one assertion Veronica makes in chat, which is people aren't able to reason out their positions. They absolutely are, but they are still affected by their environment and influenced by such. My argument would be is that yes, moral luck falls into this, which is what makes this very uncomfortable, because the problem is that someone can write a fanfic and another person can write a fanfic and their entire intentionality is going to be radically different. Sometimes they could be doing it as very real ways to process their trauma. And then in that case, that intentionality needs to be taken into consideration.
Well, and you might not always know that one, right? That's one that I find comes out in
Someone
works.
might be just writing it as spank material, in which case that's terrible, but we still have to figure it. We still have to, in some ways, allow for that form of production, even if we don't like it. Because you can't shut down one without causing what I would actually say is real harm to the other. You also have Jessica Metal saying, this kind of reminds me of the scene from The Office. This literally came up this weekend. The scene from The Office where the guy's like, this is a hate crime. And another guy says, that's not what a hate crime is. And the first guy says, well, I hated it. This is literally this. Someone buy Leo Child a damn subscription. Jason Nebular said in YouTube chat, I know I wasn't supposed to be looking, but I can't help it. Jason Nebular said, see, I think if it's animated and you cast adult-aged actors, then there's no harm done no harm no matter what the subject was. This is the same way but at the same time, the thing can still be critiqued. I would agree.
Well,
if Kill a Kill, for example, all of the actors are, to my knowledge,
oh, you mean
adults.
the adults behind?
Yeah. Adult-aged actors.
Right, so voice actors in this case, right? Yeah, okay, yep. Oh, God, ow, sorry.
And there is there is merit in media that, I'm sorry, Tiamat, where you didn't put Jason Nebular's brilliant comments. My apologies.
Okay. This one I think we're okay, because everybody's kind of with us.
And there's merit in media that makes you uncomfortable. That's true. Why do people watch horror films? No one wants to get murdered by a guy in a hockey mask.
Yeah.
But you watch them because they're scary. They're a thing, right? My point with this is that, like, we're going to keep coming back to this with the whole conflict is not abuse, offense is not harm, or not necessarily harm thing. We as the online left have to get better at how we deal with this and deal with things like it, because we have gut reactions. I've heard content creators say all sorts of crazy shit about different types of media and not thinking about the fact that the people watching them are hearing this and are going to act from that. My personal take is that we have to get better at discerning the things that actually matter and are harmful, because we have X amount of time in our lives. If we get mad about every little fucking thing, or claim that everything that makes us uncomfortable is somehow causing large-scale harm, this is where we I think start to fall into the trap where we can be critiqued by the right, because then they can start claiming that we say that everything is harmful, when in reality we're making really good arguments about things that have very demonstrable facts around them. Veronica asked, did we ever get a concrete definition of harm versus discomfort? We'll have another video on that, but I think the short version of this, and I would say is that I would define in the short term, we may edit these together, discomfort is in this case framed as something that brings up any kind of hurt, dysphoria, not gender dysphoria, but dysphoria in the general sense, or some mechanism of negative feelings, or pain, or ache, or some other type of thing in the body that would normally be framed under that term, that comes from the engagement with some type of phenomenon, whether that is, an event, a media, or whatever. Harm is defined in my mind as something that can be shown to have done demonstrable damage or decrease in functionality to a person, a group, a system, a community, or whatnot, And that this can be shown either by direct observation of the harm, right? So if a missile hits a building, we can kind of fucking see that, or through the data around that phenomenon. So in this case, we know that trans identities are being harmed by cissexism and by transphobia because we see the way bullying, harassment, and things like that hurt people like us. We can see the data in this. When people aren't allowed to transition, suicide rates go up, right? So we have very real evidence to make those claims. The same thing with, say, over-policing and various other things that are inflicted upon Black people. Same thing. We have very real data to show this. We also know why capitalism is bad, because on never-ending growth, we have data to show that things like measuring the GDP is wrong because the GDP doesn't account for things like human happiness and overall improvement of society. To me, those are the definitional differences. And it feels like there's a lot of people on, well, a fuck ton on the right, but also a lot of people on the left that want to escalate one to the other for the purposes of manipulating the conversation to fit their way of thinking. Does that make sense? So I think I'm good on this topic. How are you feeling?
I think there's just a couple random pieces that I kind of want to say throughout.
Yeah, go please. Go please.
I'm going to be honest. When we're talking about sex, I'm just going to say, people think of all sorts of shit, okay? They do. Like, brain scatter, they think of all sorts of things, right? Okay? And there's lots of things. And, like, people as a whole love taboos. Okay? They do. They always do. Right? And it's like, when we take into account these things, it gets even weirder to, like, start, like, thought policing this stuff because you just can't. There's no real way to do it. Okay?
I have something on that topic in a second.
You can do it on that topic because the next part I had was ways to do constructive criticism.
Oh, cool. Yeah, we'll look into that in just a second.
Yeah.
So real quick, just as a side note to what Zena's saying. First off, Zena's demonstrably correct and based. But here's the thing I want you guys to think about and be aware of is this. Like, my brain just died. What were you talking about?
People think of all sorts of things during sex.
Oh, no, I'm not even going to say that. I'm going to say this. I'm going to make a claim, and you can lie if you'd like, but I'm inside your head. All of you have at one point or another thought of violence. All of you at one point or another have thought of a sex act that is not your normal gig and may even be considered a taboo or whatnot. And maybe you didn't follow through with this. Maybe this wasn't like a something you were really interested in, but it passed, it came, it passed, it went. Anything that human beings can do, any atrocity, I'm going to argue to some degree, may or may not have passed through every single human mind. Human beings are very evolved primates, but we're still primates. We still engage in very real fears of violence, of being violent, of harming other people, of dealing with all sorts of horrific things. The reason I bring this up is not to shock you and say, you know, pretend that I'm like fucking Charles Xavier and I'm in your head, but the reality is that that's normal. People think about horrific things. They just do. Not all the time. And obviously if it's happening a lot through intrusive thoughts and things like that, you should probably see a therapist, see that video we have. But the reality is that like your guys' like the idea that your thoughts are somehow going to do harm is nonsense. That's not logic. That's the secret. That's the belief that thoughts become things, that manifestations come from thoughts, that ignore the fact that I'm pretty sure poor children really wish for food. It's magical thinking. And then we beat ourselves up with this. It's weird. I'm giving you permission to think about anything you want. I don't care how horrible it is. The only trick is you cannot harm anyone. You cannot violate the consent of another being. You cannot in any way enact those behaviors should they lead to lead to outcomes that either cause interpersonal or systemic harm. I am going to die on this hill. There is a difference between thoughts and behavior. I have no interest in fucking patrolling what you think about. Zena and I have no wish to change anything you're thinking about, because the moment I start taking that approach, I'm going down a reactionary route. I can call myself a leftist all I want. Guess what? I don't care if I call myself an anarchist or a socialist or a anarcho-communist. I'm being a reactionary, because that's what reactionaries do. They patrol thought. This is what authoritarianism does. This is what people who want to control what you think and feel do. That isn't like a fear tactic I'm using. That's just the demonstrable truth. Think about it. They don't want kids thinking about their trans. That's why they have fucking Don't Say Gay bill. Fascism always attempts to control thought. It always attempts to use the idea that if you take away language, the person can't think about it because they don't want you to have it. This is newspeak. This is echoes. So, radical Quaker, when we're talking about thoughts are not beliefs. Those are two different things. I would argue a thought is an emotionally charged belief that someone by definition has reified again and again. You believe in God because you have faith in God. You believe in communism or socialism or, fucking whatever tankies pretend they believe. It's authoritarianism for those who don't know. Because they have an emotional attachment to that thought. What I am talking about is, you don't have to believe everything you think. Thank you, Bobby Towers. So that's the thing. You can have this random thought pop in your head, an intrusive thought of doing some horrific thing. But if you don't act on it and you don't believe in that, it goes against your values. I don't think there's a problem.
Hell, PMDD does lots of intrusive thoughts and really intense ones really easily because PMDD is a
I just don't care what you guys jerk off to. I just don't. I'm gonna be really honest. If you're in your own head and you're like in the shower or in bed or whatever, like you do you. You do you. As long as you're not doing harm in the world, I don't care.
Right? That's super a thing.
Like this is the point. And I'll let Zena get to this idea of how to do constructive criticism. My argument is you got to see Hyenas based. And you named it Ash. Oh, sorry, that would still unlock me. We'll come back to that. But I wanted to make this really clear is I just don't give a fuck about thought policing. I think it's stupid. I think it's bad. I think it's a thing that we have better ways to inform and educate people than using shame and pretending that people are doing harm by having a thought. If you want to believe in The Secret, if you want to believe in magical thinking, that someone can think about a cheeseburger and a cheeseburger manifest, because that's literally the idea. Someone has a random thought pop into their head and somehow you've created harm. You're just a child. That's magical thinking. It's the same fucking thing as believing in Santa. Rant over. Zena, how do we actually critique this shit? Go.
Okay, so critiquing. Doing it in the appropriate space for it. Okay, and doing it when in cases where it is actually like wanted. Or at least wanted, or at least in some format warranted for some reason. Okay, when we're talking about like public like content creators or, people on the news, critique it, okay? If you're dealing with like a teen on a fanfic site who just put out a story that you think is shit and you want to just go yell at it, okay, maybe think again. Maybe actually check in with people if they actually want the critique and are in the space to hear that from you, okay? This is really important for your personal relationships, right? When you're on a Discord server, if somebody like wrote a poem and you feel like you want to give critique, no, maybe check in with them first, okay? Before you just go, it's a load, it's all this, and here's all my thoughts on it, okay? Because sometimes not everybody needs critique right then, okay? So choose when you're doing it, right? Put it in places that are appropriate. Comment sections, right? If you've got an issue with our video, comment, okay? We try to get back to you. We do. Use I statements, right? I feel this. when I was reading this scene, I felt about this, okay? I think, I feel, I believe, right? Those are all good I statements. What's the other one? I had one more I had another one or two in my head. Try to pick out the big couple of things in a work, okay? When you're dealing with writing, pick maybe the top two or three things maybe that you want to critique. Depends on, how much time and how much you're like engaging with the author, okay? Mm-hmm. So just pick the top couple of things for them to work on, okay? And focus on those things. The other thing is having good suggestions on how to improve or how to change it. If a phrasing of something isn't making sense to you, kind of dig into, okay, why is that phrasing not working in my head? What would be your suggestions for changes? Okay, so that's the other big one. Suggestions for improvement, right? What would you do to make something better? Okay, hey, you know what? Maybe if you added a couple lines about this thing, I think that would make this scene make a little bit more sense to me, okay? That might handle some problematic material really well if there's a better explanation for it, right? And the other thing is, give positive fucking critique. God damn it.
The sandwich method is effective. I'm sorry. I need to hear a little positive in there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Do you want to like make ADHD kids like never do anything again? Only give them negative critique and that's it. That's all you do. Okay?
Yup.
They will just shut down and not want to do anything again. All kids will be like that, okay? So it's good to start with, hey, here's something positive, right? Kind of work into some of your critique afterwards, okay? And then try to end on some positive note, okay? Hey, you know what? I really like this part of the story. I thought these parts were really interesting. Something encouraging, something to keep going. Because, God damn it, if you're in like this critiquing position, you're in like a personal interaction, okay? Don't be a dick. So, I think those are some of my top things for critique.
And for anyone that thinks that this is a weird position for us to have, be really clear. This has literally been our position with every content creator. Let's be clear. If you look at every single content creator we've talked about, it's the same thing here. You can critique somebody. We did it at Jessie Gender. We critiqued her on the We Spa stuff. I think she handled that initially poorly. She handled it and fixed it. But the thing is you can do that in a constructive way. This doesn't have to be just about fan fiction. It doesn't have to be just about shows. It doesn't have to be about anything. Mm-hmm. Just fucking being human to people. And if they're being dicks, if they're being demonstrably damaging, like aggressive, offensive, etc., don't engage with them. It's okay.
Yeah. And you can pick through what critiques you accept into and which ones you don't, right? Maybe somebody doesn't like your personal style, but this is your style and that's what you want to do. Okay. It's a decision to consider, but it's ultimately your decision.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that said, I think that's everything for me.
Yeah, you can write whatever you want.
Just expect that if you put it out there, people are going to critique it.
People can critique it, yeah.
But if something, and I'm going to say this as part of the pretend therapeutic advice we give here, and that is, it's not really pretend. It'd be pretend if I say I was being a pretend therapist. Anyway, sorry, getting languaging right. The point being is that, I give anyone permission who has been through any kind of trauma to write about it, either through diaries, through fanfic, through whatever they need to process that. I don't give a fuck what other people think about it. Sometimes you need to process that shit out on paper.
Yeah, that is super true.
Full stop. So with that said, guys, we will see you in the next one. All right? Love you. Bye.
Bye.
If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, consider donating to us. You can support us on our website, transgirltherapist.org. You can also help us on our Patreon, link below, or you can become a member here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching.